Are you sick of scrolling through Netflix and Hulu searching for movies that are high quality and family friendly? Christian Cinema has thousands of movies available on demand that you can watch anytime, anywhere. When you sign up for a giving membership, a premium offering from Christian Cinema, you can watch 5 free movies every month. Learn more about becoming a giving member at... Are you sick of scrolling through Netflix and Hulu searching for movies that are high quality and family friendly? Christian Cinema has thousands of movies available on demand that you can watch anytime, anywhere. When you sign up for a giving membership, a premium offering from Christian Cinema, you can watch 5 free movies every month. Learn more about becoming a giving member at givingcompany.com/giving membership and start watching great movies today. The other side of the road is safe, where we sidestep being bothered and avoid getting involved. But rolling up your sleeves and boldly going where few dare to tread, that's walking through Samaria. Each week on our podcast, we introduce you to the special few who walk in the spirit of the Good Samaritan. On behalf of the Giving Company and your hosts, David Hendrickson and Dan Riveros, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast. I'm your host, Dan Riveros, with my co-host,
David Hendrickson.
How's it going, man?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Got your Atlanta Braves hat on?
I am, man. You got you're fresh off a whole mission.
Hood to coast.
Hood to coast,
yeah.
man.
Yeah, we had Brian Frazier on here a couple weeks ago, and one of my teammates is Pastor Ray Hardy from the Point Church in North Carolina, and we're going to actually talk about him a little bit on this podcast.
I just want all the listeners to know that I was expecting David to tell me he was done working out. He was going to be taking a break. He said, no, I'm ready to get right back
right back into it. After a couple weeks off, I need to keep running for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we got a special guest today, man.
We do. Peter Mutabazi, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Well, thank you. Looking forward to chatting and getting to know you guys.
Yeah, so great to have you. Sounds like you have a little one with you as well. And for those of you that follow you, for those of our listeners that follow you on Instagram, Foster Dad Flipper, I think is your Instagram handle. They know why. You've been very active with the foster care system and with foster children, and we're super excited to talk about your story today. If you don't mind, Peter, I'm going to start with your bio, and then we're going to dive right into this exciting topic. Peter Mutabazi is an entrepreneur, an international advocate for children, and the founder of Now I Am Known, a corporation that supplies resources to encourage and affirm children. At age 10, Peter ran away from home in rural Uganda to escape his abusive father. For 5 years, he survived on the streets of Kampala, a city of 1.5 million people, until one man saw potential in him. This one person not only supported Peter through school, but altered Peter's outlook on life in every possible way. Since then, Peter Mutabazi has served as a relief coordinator through the Rwandan genocide, worked for the International Committee of the Red Cross during the Sudan conflict, immigrated to the United States, fostered countless children, and become a single foster and adoptive parent. He speaks 7 languages and has traveled to more than 100 countries as an international advocate for vulnerable children. A single father and foster dad, Mutabazi has also worked for World Vision and Compassion International. He has appeared on media outlets such as the BBC and the Today Show and continues to be a passionate speaker. He currently lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now I Am Known, his latest book, is Peter's inspiring true story. In it, he reveals the transformational power of taking risks, learning to forgive, overcoming self-doubt, breaking negative patterns, and believing in a better future. He becomes a friend in this must-read, encouraging you to propel forward into a purpose-driven life marked by hope and meaning. Welcome, Peter, to the Walking Through Samaria podcast again.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I have to tell everybody, Dan, including you, how this happened. So I've actually followed Peter on Instagram for a long time. And his stories, his posts are fascinating. So you mentioned Hood to Coast. I'm on the shuttle. I land in Portland. I get on the shuttle to the Sheridan, and lo and behold, Pastor Ray Hardy from the Point Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, is on the shuttle with me, and he's one of my teammates. So I said, hey, Ray, good to see you. Ray had actually taken the shuttle. He was trying to get dropped off at a restaurant. Anyway, he said, I'm here, to do the race, but I'm also kind of repping a book. And I said, well, what book is it? And he said, well, it's called Now I Am Known, from one of my friends who's from Uganda. And I said, well, we should get him on the podcast. This sounds amazing. So Ray introduces me to Peter on email, and I realize that it's the same Peter Mutabazi that I've been following on Instagram for a really long time. And so Ray is one of my dear friends. We've run Hood to Coast together 5 or 6 times. If you don't mind, give me the scoop on how you know Pastor Ray Hardy from the Point Church in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Well, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So as you said, I work, I still work for World Vision. So one day we had a training, and we had this pastor with, who came in to give us like a little glimpse of what it meant to work with pastors. And he had a Southern draw. I was in Denver. I was like, man, this guy sounds really cool.
Yeah.
But as soon as I got here, World Vision's like, you need to meet Pastor Ray. So I got to meet him. I mean, we instantly fell in. I mean, he loves my kids, and he's been my biggest supporter. And he's like my family. All my kids know him. And I have a 3-year-old here. I got him 10 days ago. And
oh my gosh,
the only person I had to call was Pastor Ray. I'm like, hey, I need a stroller and a car seat. Where do I get them? Like,
yeah.
He's a credit card. Just go buy them. So that's how close we are.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he's the one who inspired me to write the book as well. He's like, you need to write a book. I'm like, I'm not sure, So he's truly been there for me in so many ways.
That's amazing. So we are going to talk about Peter's book, Now I Am Known. I'd love for everybody to hear what Pastor Ray wrote about the book at the very beginning. So in the endorsements, here's what Pastor Ray Hardy writes. Peter's story is a nightmare transformed into a dream come true. He is a true gift from God. His story is page-turning, death-defying, grace-infused, and emotionally inspiring. This is truth stranger than fiction and a movie waiting to be made. But you will want to read his story first. It's that good. And he is as genuine in real life as he seems in the book. I count it an honor to be his friend. He is the real deal. So there's the words from Pastor Ray Hardy, lead pastor and cultural architect from the Point Church in North Carolina. So how about that? It's indeed a small world.
Yeah, small world.
Yeah. So Peter, let's start at the beginning, if you don't mind. We did our shout out to Pastor Hardy. You ran away from home one night. I think you were 10 years old. You were told to go buy cigarettes for your father. It was raining. You talk in the book about sleeping on dirt floors with your siblings, enduring a lifelong of physical, emotional abuse at the hands of your father. Tell our listeners, if you don't mind, straight from your mouth, what it was like growing up in those early years in Miyabakoni.
Well, growing up as a kid in Africa, life was miserable in every shape, form you could imagine. I didn't have a name until when I was 2 years old. Why? Because most children who were born during my time would die before the age of 2. So most moms didn't name their kids until they were sure. So at 2, my mom called me, he's a gift given to us by God. So from the get-go, the odds of survival were really rare. At the age of 4, I could do literally what a 12, 15-year-old can do, able to take care of my siblings, able to cook, able to go to the garden and just somehow help my mom, but also walk for miles and miles to get just clean water, And so the misery wasn't just us, but it was in my whole village. We're all poor, So there wasn't any glimpse of hope within, the boundaries or the surroundings where I lived. So for me, from the get-go, just the basic of life were not there. We never had a mattress. We never had I'd never seen a pair of shoes in my life until when I was, 16. So for me, life was just so miserable from just the poverty level.
Yeah.
And then as I began to visit other families, I noticed that their parents or their dads were different than my dad. I knew my dad as harsh, mean, abusive in every shape, form you could imagine.
Right.
I never had one kind word from my dad. How kids, we do so much, so you can get at least one praise from your dad. Like, I never got one. All I had from my dad was, you've never amount to anything. You're garbage. I wish you were never born so I don't have to feed you. That's what I had from the age as far as I could understand words to the time I ran away. So for me, life was just miserable in every shape, form you could think of.
Wow.
But also towards my mother. So every abuse I got, I watched my mom go through the same thing. So for me, dreaming was, I could dream to go through an hour. There was no place to dream. There was no hope. And I didn't even want, even if there was hope, I don't think I ever wanted to see it, because today was so harsh that I knew it's going to repeat the next day, that I didn't want to wish or think about tomorrow,
Wow.
So that was really my childhood as a kid, where there was literally no glimpse of hope in every shape, form.
And as you look back on it, Peter, what was the breaking point? What caused you that one night in the rain to take money you had saved, take the money your father gave you for cigarettes, and just keep walking to the bus station and not turn around?
I think I knew at one point he would kill me. So this night, he'd send me to buy cigarettes, and they all got destroyed. So I knew, I was like, look, he's going to beat me, and I can't take it anymore. So instead of going back home, I just ran to the bus station. I'd never been 20 miles away. And I asked the lady, I said, hey, of all these buses, which really goes the farthest? I think I wanted to die, but I did not want to die in the hands of my dad. It was more of, I'd rather die in the hands of a stranger than my own father. So running away wasn't like I was looking for hope. It was more of, how far can I go that he never get to see my dead body? That was my idea as a 10-year-old.
Wow.
Really looking for a place to run away to. So I went to the bus, and I went 500 kilometers away, and that became my journey.
Wow. So the way you write about it in the book, you wind up in the capital of Uganda, in Kampala. You make friends relatively quickly. There are a number of kids who are homeless, forgive the term, but I think you refer to yourselves as street rats. And, you learn quickly kind of how to survive. Tell us a little bit about those years. I think maybe 4 or 5 years you spent living on the streets, literally in the capital of Uganda, which is this big city of 1.5 million people.
Quickly, I got to meet other street kids that really taught me how to survive. I had always been a survivor, but this time I had, other fellow, age mates and coming from the same background, that we learned how to survive. Stealing, we ate in the garbage, we ate in the, we stole, we didn't steal money, we just stole food. And we did it through helping, so in Africa, people buy food. So if you buy a bunch of banana, if I help you, I've given you cheap labor, but I'll take one. And then, the more we take from each other, at the end of the day, we have enough. So that became my life. But also, we were abused in every way, shape you could think of, verbally, sexually, naming every shape, form that, that became our lives. And it wasn't like we could fight it, because how do you fight someone beating you, because they're going to beat you the next day?
Yeah.
So for me, that became more of a life of really helpless. But also I go to see my fellow, kids die as well along, and we were the one to bury them. We would eat, food from the trash, and sometimes it was poisonous, and, to some of our fellow would die, or would sleep under the buses, and sometimes they would drive without looking who was under. And now,
oh my gosh,
would lose their lives. So for me, I don't know. It was, do I have a next hour? And if I had a next hour, do I have a next one? That became my way of life. And I was treated like a stray animal in most ways. As you said, we're street rats. That's how people looked at us.
Yeah.
And that became my journey for almost 5 years.
And you were convinced that this wasn't going to end well, right? You were sort of resolved to the fact that death was almost certain at a young age.
Oh yeah, as early as 4, I kind of given up on life, and I wanted to end in a way too, because it was just so miserable. And as a street kid, I think every morning I felt like, man, I wish I didn't have to wake up. I wish I woke up and I was gone.
Wow.
That was my wish every day, because of the misery we're going through.
This was the other thing, not the other thing. One of the many things that was fascinating, as I read in the book, was how little sleep you got. You didn't sleep much at all, right? Being a street kid.
No, we could not sleep, because sleeping was dangerous to us. Think of it. You're sleeping under the bridge or in the sewer. If someone throws garbage or acidic anything, that meant it can get to you. So being moving at all times was really helpful, and being useful at all times was always helpful in summer. So I would sleep maybe an hour every 24 hours.
Oh my gosh.
That's all I would get. But I think our bodies and mind got used to that really we knew how to just move from one end to the other every day, all day. We would only sleep early in the morning between usually 3 and 5 a.m. in the morning because it was a little safer during that time.
Oh my gosh.
But during the day, there's no way you would risk. No.
Well, your journey takes a significant turn, starting with somebody that you, I think, carry groceries for to his car. His name is James. And if I read this correctly in the book, Peter, the bus station at the Capitol would kind of turn into a marketplace during the day is sort of how I read it, that lots of shops and stands and commerce would sort of happen around the bus station on a daily basis. And you wind up meeting James, meeting his kids, and that sets you on a journey. Tell our listeners about that journey that started with meeting James in the marketplace.
Right, absolutely. So as street kids, we would steal food by helping people. So for me, I saw this guy, he was wearing glasses, wearing khaki, speaking English. So I thought, there's my target.
Yeah, there's my guy. Yeah.
There's my guy. I followed him as he bought produce. So as soon as he bought, I think there were bananas and potatoes, like, okay, where's your car? I'll carry them for you. He's like, hey, no, what's your name? I was like, wait, you want to know my name?
Yeah.
So I backed off. I put the bananas down. I backed off. I was like, first of all, it was scary. For 4.5 years, no one ever asked me my name. But two, as street kids, if you're kind, that meant you're abusive because every kindness followed abuse. So as soon as he wanted to know my name, it was like, danger, run.
Wow.
But I was like, I'm not going to run before I get my food, So I stayed and I told him my name is Peter. And then he let me carry his things. And before I could steal it, he gave me something to eat and he left, But I didn't really pay attention because as I said, when you're kind, that also was a sign of danger. So I didn't want to know more. And then the next day he came. The third day is kind of what shook me because he still called me by my name. It was the only human being for all those 5 years that could refer me by my name. So I always looked forward to him. Not that he was giving me food for sure, but for a moment, I felt like I could hear the sound of my mother because my mom always called me by my last name, my name. And really that really made me human for a moment. Like it was the only day that I always knew there's a human being that sees me as a human being. And he fed me for 1.5 years. And one day he said, hey, would you like to go to school? I was like, wait, no. Me? I mean, I'm a street kid. What's wrong with you? I'm a dog. I am rubbish. I'll never mount anything. That's what I hear every day. School is for human beings. Come on, sir. Don't you see? Like, don't you have eyes in some way? That's what I was telling him. Like, he's like, you crazy? Like, that's not for me. Not for me because I could not go. But I was told I was never good enough to go that far.
I wanna put a pin on this for a second and pause because, is one of the messages that I would like our listeners to hear, Peter, from you is this idea of how important it was for James to see something in you and recognize something in you that you couldn't see in yourself. I mean, you're a pretty incredible student, right? Multiple languages, you've been to multiple universities, multiple degrees, and James is able to kind of figure this out when you're a young boy, maybe a young teenager on the streets of Kampala. Tell our listeners how important it was for somebody else to see in you something you couldn't see for yourself.
Of course, I think my own father saw the worst in me. Think about like you're born and you get here, your dad say, I wish you were never born. You'll never mount anything. You believe them, you believe what they say because that's what I looked like. That's what I smelled like. And I think for me, for him to see the best in me at my lowest was probably what shook me. Like, oh, this man, what does he see that the rest of the world doesn't see? Even my own father, he knows me as a failure. why would he see the best in me, you know? And I think that really made me curious, but curious to what degree of a human being could do such a thing, you know? And for the first time, I think the more he looked at me that way, the more he offered, the more he saw potential in me, the more I began to believe in myself. Like, wait a minute, if this man really thinks I'm human, maybe I'm human, you know, maybe I am somebody. And that's really why I don't know how to say it, but think about like, when all your life you never thought you were anything, when there was no glimpse of hope for you as a human being, but someone else sees that in you, but not in you, but at your lowest. I was a thief, you know. It's not like I got to know him because I was kind, you know.
Yeah.
I was trying to steal from him, but yet he could see the best in me, you know. But he didn't push me away. He never called me the names that everyone was calling me. That he never forgot me. He always came back. And I think his actions really made me stop and think about myself. Like, wait a minute, there's something about me maybe that I didn't know. This man sees that I ought to believe in. And that's really what captivated me. And he didn't do it for 1 month. He did it for 1.5 years. And I think that length of time helped me to see that on a weekly basis, that I began to believe that there was something about me that was special that I didn't know. And that's really what changed me.
That's awesome. So make sure I pronounce the name of the school correctly that you went to. Is it Katweha?
Katweha, yes.
Yeah, Katweha School is a boarding school. It's on beautiful grounds. You have 3 square meals a day. That was probably one of the biggest attractions for you when you started at the school was being able to have regular meals at regular times of healthy food. But this was not an easy transition. This was another fascinating thing that I read about in the book is you had fights with other kids. You didn't want to play with other kids. You actually didn't go into the classroom for a number of months. You would stand outside the classroom by the door and listen to the instructor teach. And that was how you learned the lessons. You felt very uncomfortable, it sounded like, or it read like in the book, when you went to boarding school. Tell our listeners why that transition was so difficult for you personally.
You know, so for me, the attraction to go to boarding school was food because, you know, he tried many times, but I didn't want to go. But once he said, hey, there'll be dinner, lunch, and breakfast, I was like, are you sure? I'll check it out. Because my attraction was food. And once I got there, then they gave me food. Then I waited for the next meal, which was dinner. Then it came. Then I waited for breakfast. So the more I knew there was food, the longer I didn't want to run away, the longer I stayed, but also think about like, wait a minute, I'm about to beat this kid who's just standing right here. But if I do, I'm going to miss my chance of getting the other meal, you know? So for me, the attraction of me staying and trying to transition to what life was there was all about food. It wasn't about the bed I was sleeping.
Yeah.
I mean, they gave me a mattress, but I didn't sleep on it for almost a month because I wasn't used to. They gave me a back bed. I was like, there's no way I'm going to sleep up there, you know? But the food is really what helped me shape everything about my journey. I had grown up from a street. There were no rules, you know? I knew how to defend myself. If someone came to me and said, hey, do you want to go play to me? You want to fight, you know? So, but then I would hesitate, you know, fighting because I was like, but I want that meal, so I can't beat up this kid.
Right.
Or I would want to steal, you know, from the dormitory. I was like, if I take this, I'm gonna miss my food. So I would hold on doing what was normal to me because I wanted that meal. And even going to class, it was more of, wait a minute. For me to have a meal, I think I'm going to go to that class, but I'll be there for 10 minutes and then I'll walk out. You know?
Yeah. Oh, wow.
But also, I think the kids didn't see the worst in me. I think all the bad feelings was all in my head, but they didn't really look at me that way, you know? The teachers were kind. That they were always, every time I would get an F, but every time I got a D, they're like, hey, Peter, you're just really smart. I'm like, oh, really? Are you sure? Are you sure? But the more I had kind words, the more the kids would invite me to go play soccer. the slowly I began to really join in, but it was joining in. So I wanted a meal. And then once I go to the shelter, then I didn't want to miss the shelter. I knew if they kick me out, then I'm going to go back on the streets. And I knew how to live under the sewer bridge. That I didn't want to do that. So for me, the meal and the shelter really helped me really begin to dream. And that's any human being. We always think we give them food, it'll be okay. But when we meet the basic needs in life for what they need the most, then the rest will come around, then the rest will happen. And so for me, food and shelter helped me behave, but also begin have a glimpse of hope that I could keep this for a long time.
Wow. Well, to fast forward, you had a huge gap in terms of being on level educationally and your fellow students. You not only catch up at Katweha School, but you excel at Katweha School, and you wind up getting accepted to what I think is the one university in Uganda, Makerere University. And at what point did you kind of get it, Peter, that you were able to excel educationally?
So once I'd been there for 6 months and he invited me to his home, so I had never been a family unit. I had never seen, like a dad talk to his kids and sitting on the table. So they invited me and I got to see that. I was like, wait a minute, I was hesitant to go in the house because I was afraid they're going to fight and I didn't want to be hit. So I sat in the exit door. And they put a chair for me to sit on the dining table. They say, hey, Peter, here's a seat you can sit. And I think seeing that really changed my life because for the very first time, I saw a dad, I saw a family, and that I wouldn't want it to have. I want that. And so I knew the education was the only way that would lead me to that. Then I went back to school and began to really do more, take it serious because I saw the example of what I wanted to be, and that really changed my life. And teachers, I think, were very instrumental, that they wouldn't give up on me, that they would take sometimes an extra time. Sometimes I say, I don't understand this. They will say, you can stay in class and I'll help you. So I saw how willing they were helping me and how they saw the best in me and words of affirmation. And then I began to really excel in school in some way because of the kindness of the teachers.
Wow, that's fantastic. So you decide to take a gap year in between boarding school and university. And I think it was James who actually said, hey, would you like to work assisting with logistics in Rwanda? And at the time, Rwanda is experiencing a genocide between the Hutus and the Tutsis, I think. And you write in the book that something like 800,000 people are killed in 100 days in Rwanda. But I believe because of the proximity of Uganda, where you lived in Uganda and Rwanda, they thought that you could help with logistics and with humanitarian aid during the genocide. That also sort of creates another turn in the road for you, which we'll talk about in a second. But tell us a little bit about what it was like to be in Rwanda during that time.
My dad is from Rwanda, so I speak the language. So it was a really cool opportunity for me to go help and rescue children and provide shelter and food and medication. So going there, I was excited. This was my first job. I was like, man, I got a job. Wow, But little did I know what I was getting into. Because once I got there, I saw more than 2,000 dead bodies on a daily basis. So I thought, there's no way I can make it back. There's no way I'm going to survive. So I think preparing for death was my only way. At the same time, I think it was difficult to see that human beings could do this to other human beings. And I could not understand. And I stood there and I said, God, how can you do that? But then I looked at my own self. I said, I hated my dad. I mean, I hated my dad so much that I wanted to go back home at some point and harm him. And as much as I pointed the finger to these people who had killed, their fellow humans, countrymen, the more I felt like I was capable of doing that. And that's when I turned to the driver and I said, you know what? I I really need to know. I really need to know my faith. I need to know Christ as my Lord and Savior. I just have the same hatred, but I'm just watching to what people did to others, and that was a difficult time because I didn't think I would come back. I thought I would lose my life during that time in Rwanda.
Right. This is what you wrote in the book. We're talking with Peter Mutabazi, the author of Now I Am Known. And on page 132, Peter, this is what you write. Driving down the road in Rwanda, watching the living dead stagger past us, looking out on burnt out houses and boarded up churches, I could not help but wonder how different those who had committed these atrocities were from me. Did they feel as justified in acting on their hate as I felt toward my father? I mean, that ultimately put you on a little bit of a different journey in terms of how you thought about the relationship with your dad, right?
Absolutely. I think, humans were easy to see the wrong in others, but we don't reflect on our own. And I think for me, it gave me an opportunity to think about, I am capable of this. My hatred towards my dad is just so bad that I wanted to harm him. And it's that point that I had to let it go. I say, I can't live my life this way. I have to forgive my dad.
Wow. Unbelievable. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about your last name in a minute. But before we do that, I want to kind of go chronologically here again. So you get a business degree from Makerere University. And during your time there, they ask you to host some students from Durham University in London. And I want to stop on this point for a second because Dan and I have talked to a number of people on this podcast about who learns what from whom during some of these vision trips and mission trips and engagement trips and those kinds of things. So you set up some pretty interesting experiences for students from Durham University in London when they were visiting Uganda. Tell our listeners, if you don't mind, who learned what from whom during those visits?
Oh, well, I don't know. I think as a Ugandan, I thought, these teenagers, they are here to do what,
Right.
But for me, I really didn't know who they were. I was just helping my pastor to show them around, and that was my job, But along the way, I learned who they were, what they were looking for, what they were doing, and how they were trying to share the gospel, and I had a lot of questions like, well, we might be poor, but we love the Lord. We have faith than you think. Our faith isn't based on what we have, or just because we're poor doesn't mean we don't know the Lord deeper in a way. So I got to learn from them, and I got to teach them as well of what my life, what my journey, what we as Africans truly aspire to be. And that's where we became friends.
Yeah, I think you wrote in the book, the excitement of the students when they arrived in Uganda, and then they get on the bus and they see the depth of the poverty and the challenge in the country, and their mood kind of goes down. And then they experience the worship from these kids, who are growing up in poverty and sleeping on dirt floors, and many have abusive parents. And this is one of the things that Father Greg Boyle talks about in his books about the gangbangers in, southern Los Angeles. Like, if you really want to have an impact, and I think this is a message to believers out there, like, we have a lot to learn, right? It's not that we should be imposing, our worldview on these kids, but it's that we should learn from them. And there's so much to learn from them. I mean, these are kids that love the Lord despite what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis in Uganda.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if we can always have a desire to know that they have something that I would like to learn from them, and I have something that I would like to teach them, I think that really puts us in an equal footing, when we approach that way. Yes, as you get to know, I'm a foster dad, but I think for me, not understanding, having empathy towards their family and themselves and what they've gone through, I think I'll lose the mark for being the best that I can if I didn't recognize that, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So even for those who have a heart for, for countries that have less, to know like they have less, we have so much, but they have more, sometimes a little bit more depth to their faith, that we go saying, I'm not going to teach them about Jesus, but I'm going to go learn more about Jesus and how he loves me and share the opportunity and the resource he's given me. It changes on how we see each other and how we approach each other. And that's really what I wanted to share with my, with my visitors that I got to send in Africa, that, they have more sometimes than we think.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I want to make sure I get this right, but at this point in your story, in your journey, you have become quite educated. So just to put this into context for our listeners, you spend the first 10 years of your life on a dirt floor, abusive father, not a lot of sleep, thinking you're going to die at the hands of your dad. You escape. You're almost 5 years living on the streets in the capital of Uganda. You wind up with a business degree. You wind up with a degree in crisis management from Durham University. You wind up through those relationships that you made with those visitors from Durham University in London. You wind up attending Durham in London. You get a crisis management degree. You come to the U.S. You attend the Masters University in California. And I think I read you speak 7 languages. Is that right? Do I have that number correct?
Yes.
So you're uber educated. You work for several years with World Vision and Compassion and the Red Cross. You fly hundreds of thousands, probably millions of miles, taking people on trips, helping people get informed about vulnerable children around the world. And then one day, another turn in your journey, a switch gets flipped. And you get confronted with the reality of vulnerable children in your own community. And that causes you to go down another kind of different path in the foster care system. Tell our listeners how that happened.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm in Kenya with pastors, as I'll take pastors and key musicians. So we're in the middle of nowhere in Africa. And there's this pastor sitting next to me and he's super excited. He's telling me he got a little baby and he can't wait to go back. And finally he shows me the picture and I'm like, wait a minute, you're white. This kid is black. How does that work? And then he explains me about, foster care. And as he was sharing, I could literally put my own self in their shoes, like, oh my goodness, man, I can speak their language. I understand these kids. But I think also I was really conflicted. I work with Compassion International and World Vision, and I see how many millions of dollars we get to help kids in third world countries. And then I was shocked that we have almost 500,000 kids in the United States that have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And I was like, how, I'm an American now. I think maybe it took to be more personal. Like, wait a minute, these are kids. This is our future. We just can't pass them on. I love ministries and those who are helping kids all over the world. I love it. But to not to have a passion for those within our community, I was like, we're missing a point. And I think for me, Luke 12:48, too much is given, much is required. I felt I was given so much that it was my time to truly not just help the kids where I get to see them and live them, but I wanted to be my everyday life. And so I had traveled over the world. I had never seen one Black person adopting kids from Uganda, Ethiopia, or China. So I thought, maybe we don't qualify, So then when I asked someone in Ethiopia, I said, hey, is there a way I could maybe also know about adoption? They're like, well, you have to be European or American or married or single female, but not a male. I was like, oh, okay. So I knew there wasn't an opportunity for me, but I could not let it go. So I walked into the post-care system and I said, hey, is there a way you could give me an opportunity to mentor teenagers at least once a week, And the social worker looked at me and said, have you ever thought of being a foster dad? I said, well, I don't think I qualify. I didn't give her all the reasons. I just said, I'm single. And she's like, so? I'm like, you mean I can't? I mean, literally, I said, prove to me. So I had to sign the paperwork that day. It was on a Monday, and on Thursday, I began the licensing class, which we call the MAP class, because I just needed to do that for me, because someone had seen the best in me, and I could not imagine living in the United States, having an extra bedroom and going to bed knowing there was a kid that needed a place to be. And I was like, I can't live that life, that I really want to impact the life of those kids and their parents as well. It's easy to judge, I think, the parents, but once we have empathy and understand them, I think we do the best. The same with my mom. I had people who say, what a mother would let their kids be on the streets. But in my head, I was like, well, but you don't know what the abuse she had to go through. You have no idea that she could not protect me. And that's the attitude I wanted to come into foster care, to truly be that voice for kids. But also, I want to foster like 100 of them if I could, that became my passion truly to be a voice.
Wow. And you change vocations, you start to buy homes and fixing them up and flipping them, like you change your career. I mean, there was a lot about your lifestyle, the travel, all those things that changed as you became a foster parent. Before we dive a little bit deeper into your experience as a foster parent, I want to ask a couple questions just that relate to your story. So Dan, did you ever have Converse All-Star basketball shoes?
Still do.
Growing up? Do you still have them? Yeah. So I remember in 5th grade when I got my first pair of we called them Chuck Taylors, actually, back in the day. This is 4 decades ago, something like that. But Peter, I think you and I have that in common, right? Like your first pair of shoes from James before you went to boarding school was a pair of Converse All-Star basketball shoes.
Yes, I have 2 pairs that I literally put on a pedestal, because they were my first pair of shoes. And I didn't like the shoes because they were uncomfortable. When you've lived all your life without a shoe, I was like, this thing I can't do. But really, that's all I can remember of what a pair of shoes looks like.
Yeah, and you don't like to wear shoes. You said, I like to go either barefoot or sandals.
Yes.
So the other thing I want to spend a moment on, if you don't mind, is your last name. So you went by Hobby when you were a young child. I think in Ugandan tradition, you don't pass down the last name from your father, is I think how I read it in the book, but your last name, Mutabazi, is the last name of your father. Tell our listeners how that came to be.
So my last name is Habyarimana, which means a gift given by God. It's Rwandese. But the man who started the genocide in Rwanda, his last name was Habyarimana. So for an American, I'll give you an example. Think about if your last name was Hitler. Think about everywhere you went, you're like, I'm John Hitler. They're like, wait, what? Because we know the reputation that comes with that name. The same with me. I mean, I went to jail for one night, for the first time I went to Rwanda, because of my last name. And every time we went, they were like, do you know him? Are you related to him? I mean, I was a little bit more asked questions often. So I felt uncomfortable because of my last name, But once I became a U.S. citizen, I thought, I need to forgive my dad. And another way I can really show honor and gratitude is to take on his name. So I took my dad's name, in a way to be identified by him, but also to show the truly forgiveness towards him, that I'll always be called by his name because I love him, but also as a human being, that truly he's part of my life as well.
That's awesome. So let's go back to being a foster parent. You complete the training. I think it takes several months, maybe 5 months or so, you mentioned in the book. And then you asked the people from the foster care system, what happens now? And I think the response was, well, we'll probably call you in 30 minutes. and so you didn't realize this, but you kind of got hurled into being a foster parent really quickly. I hope I got this right, but I think before Anthony, you were a foster parent to maybe 10 or 11 kids. Tell our listeners a little bit about what that experience is like.
Right. Absolutely. After the licensing, I thought, okay, in a month, in 30 minutes. No, they said, make sure your phone is on 24/7. I was like, what do you mean? It's like, we could call you anytime from now. I'm like, oh no. I'm not kidding. An hour later, I got a phone call, And I wasn't prepared. I mean, I panicked. I was like, why did I sign up for this? Until that kid walked in and I was like, oh Lord, why did I sign up for this? That night, this is how I slept. I made sure that I pushed the couch in front of his door so he didn't come out. I was aware that he might wake up in the morning and just run away.
Right.
So
right.
I didn't sleep because I was so worried. Then in the morning he woke up. He's like, Dad, what are we having for breakfast? I was like, what? That's all you want? And I think from there I knew, okay, I think I can do this, and it's truly been a joy. I've had 27 children as we speak now.
Oh my gosh!
I have 6 in my home, and I'm in the process of adopting the other 3. So it's truly been a joy to truly come alongside and be a dad. The fears of, I was afraid I would be my own father, to know that that's not true.
Right?
And it's
right.
It's truly been a joy that social worker let me in and say, you can be a foster parent. And now I feel like I wish I started 10 years ago,
27 children. That is unbelievable. Now, one of the things that we learned about fostering, Dan, you may remember Katie Kenny Phillips, who we had on the podcast a few seasons ago. She fostered, I think they were siblings, and I think she wound up adopting both, if I remember correctly. But Peter, I think you would say, and Katie echoed this as well, like it's not all hunky-dory. And after your first 10 or 11 kids, you called the people from the foster care system and you said, I need a break. You said, I can't take any more. It's too emotional when the kids have to go back to either their parents or maybe another relative that's prepared to take them. Like it's emotionally draining. And you said, I need a break. You said, I need maybe 3 months. And after 4 days, you get another phone call, and they ask you to take Anthony.
Correct. It's really hard. I mean, you love these kids. It's your life. Day and night, that's you think. And all of a sudden when they leave, it's not like they give you a day to think about it. Literally, it's the judge says they can go home. The next 30 minutes, they're off, gone. You know?
Wow.
So for me, I was like, I just need a little break, it was Monday. On Friday, I get a phone call and I told the social worker, I was like, look, seriously, like I told you, But I think also when you know the need, like I think I needed a break, but at the same time, I couldn't sleep because I was wondering who's wondering having nowhere to sleep tonight, So when she called, I wasn't ready. And I said, no, I can't. She's like, please, just for the weekend. I said, this is what I said. I said, I'll take this child in, but I don't want to know anything about him.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to get attached. And I said, if you don't pick him up on Monday, you're going to find him waiting for you outside. That was me threatening. Like, if you don't, I am not taking any chances. And sure enough, he comes in at 3 a.m. because he was coming from a different place and he was at the hospital. They couldn't find a home until I said yes. So he comes in and the social worker left. I said, look, my name is Mutabazi, but it's too long and too hard. Just call me Mr. Peter. And he looks at me and he says, but can I call you my dad?
Yeah.
Literally.
Oh my gosh.
No, I didn't say, oh my gosh. So he said, can I call my dad? I said, hell no.
I'm not doing this again. Yeah.
And he just said, did you just cuss? I'm like, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. And then he looks back at me. He said, look, someone told me, like, since I'm 11, I can choose who my father should be. And I'm choosing you to be my dad. I'm like, dude, no, you're living on Monday. Do not. That's inappropriate. And he just kind of felt like, what's wrong with this guy? So we hang out and finally they came to pick him up on a Monday. I was like, look, you can take your kid, but can you now tell me why he's in the foster care? Why was he left at the hospital? Since they were there to take him, I knew, my job was done. And once they told me the story, have you ever asked God to give you something and you have it in your hands and you're like, God, why did you give me this thing again?
Right. Oh my gosh.
I was wanting to be a dad. The kid has been screaming, can you be my dad? I'm like, no. And at that moment, I think that's, he was 11. Of course, it took me back to my age as 11-year-old. I said, I can't. I have to take him in. There's no way you can be adopted once and be given out, left at the hospital without anyone saying any reason why they didn't want you anymore.
Yeah.
And I knew how to be unwanted. I knew how to be unloved. I knew how to not belong anywhere. And I could not let him go. And so 2 years later, I adopted him. But who knew? A weekend.
Right. Oh my gosh. It's a great story. As we wind down, Peter, on this conversation, thank you so much for talking to us about your new book, Now I Am Known, and about your story. Tell our listeners, if you don't mind, how Now I Am Known is also the name of an organization that you founded that is helping raise awareness for vulnerable children. How can people get their hands on the book, and how can people learn more about Now I Am Known?
Well, yeah, so I named the book Now I'm Known because he made me known, and it's my job in life right now to make others known, seen and heard. There are kids who feel sometimes they don't belong, that I want to make them known, give them the platform in some way to truly be known. But also, I wrote the book so they can learn the hurdles. I think my kids love me as dad, but I wanted them to know that the dad you love also had to face challenges, and here's how I overcame them. And I did not let my past define my future, but rather use it for good. I wanted my kids to feel the same way, or anyone who's gone through a difficult time, to say there's a purpose for me in life despite of what I've gone through. So my book, you can find it literally anywhere, in any bookstore. We have also audio on Amazon if you want to, so it can be found literally in any bookstore, and will be helpful. Also, I wrote this book because I want to help more kids, so the more people can hear about my journey, the more opportunities that they can give me to share and truly tell the journey of our kids. And that's really much. On Facebook, you can find, we have YouTube. Facebook, we can show pictures, but YouTube, I wanted people to see the behind scenes of what really means to be a foster parent. Our kids are normal. They're good kids, just looking for someone to love on them. And it's truly been a joy.
And people can go to nowiamknown.com, I think, to learn a little bit more about the organization and about you and your family. And
the book.
Yeah, and the book. That's right. And I follow you on Instagram. Tell people what you do on Instagram.
Well, on Instagram, yes, I do TikTok. And I wanted to show the picture that, I think sometimes dads, we are told, we go work and come back, tough guy. I wanted to show we can be fun, we can be tender. I have a daughter, trust me. I thought I was the boss of the house, and she's the boss of the house. And to learn that a single dad can truly journey with and do that. If I can do it, anyone can do it.
Yeah.
I really wanted to show people the fun of being a dad, but also that our kids are just normal kids wanting to be seen, heard, and known. And that's really what I love to show, the joy and fun. There are already bad words and bad things about foster care. My job is to highlight the positive. That's really what I'm all about.
That's good. I want to read a couple things that you wrote in your book, Now I Am Known, that just struck me as so true and so powerful. And then we'll wrap up with a couple final thoughts from you, Peter. But you write on page 173, God put the right people in my life at the right time. I owe everything I have to providence and the kindness of strangers. And then you write on page 196, while we are all shaped by our past, none of us are chained to it. None of us are predestined to repeat the mistakes of the generations that came before. I just think those are such powerful statements and so universal that I hope everybody that reads the book, Now I Am Known, can take away those things. Peter, if I want to ask you just two final questions. What is the one thing that you would like people to take away from reading your book, Now I Am Known?
Well, that we all have a potential to change someone else's life. Yes, a stranger changed my life.
Yeah.
But we can all be strange. We have people we work with. We don't need to be stranger, but we can truly be that instrument to change them. For those who drive or we go to the gas station, that stranger, the people that God has brought in our lives, that we can truly, rather than see them as, here the other people, but we can be that instrument to give them a glimpse of hope. But also we can learn from them. I think I've learned
that's
so
good.
much.
Yeah.
Because I was willing to learn and be open that others had more to teach me than I knew.
You're a person of faith, Peter. You've studied at university, theology, the gospel, etc. This podcast is about Good Samaritans, right? People who walk across the road to serve and take care of people that are not like themselves. And you've done that 27 times and then some in your life. When I went to the website, nowiamknown.org, you specifically refer to James as a Good Samaritan. How can our listeners learn about being a Good Samaritan from James and the role he played in your life?
Empathy. I think he saw a kid. He saw a little boy that had no hope or future and had empathy for me. So I think this, we all, as I said, when we travel, when we walk, for anyone that comes in our life to begin with empathy, I think it really draws us to know more about them. We pass street people every day, but how often do we say, "Hey, what's your name? What do they call you?" And you'd be amazed what that means by just asking that street person, "Hey, what's your name?" And I think that's what I found. Even I get bombarded and I've been stopped by the police 8 times. Sometimes the social media isn't kind sometimes, but to learn how to say, I'll not take the destruction of what God has called me to do.
Yeah.
But despite of that, despite of the gun and the noise, we still carry on, because that's a calling for us that no one can take from us. So I think empathy is what works for me.
It's so good. That's so good. Well, to our listeners, this is Peter Mutabazi. He is our guest on Walking Through Samaria. He has a new book, Now I Am Known. You can get it wherever books are sold. You can go to nowiamknown.com. I know you can follow him on Instagram as Foster Dad Flipper, because that's who I follow on Instagram. Peter, it has just been a pleasure having you on this podcast. Thank you so much for spending time with us. And thank you for the words that you put in this book. I know that it is going to move the lives of many, many people who read it.
Well, and thank you for giving the platform for others to be seen, heard, and known. And we're grateful for each one of you.
Well, that's it for today. To our listeners, this is David Henriksen with my co-host,
Dan Riveros.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Walking Through Samaria. It has been our real treat and delight to be with Peter Mutabazi, the author of Now I Am Known. Peter, thanks so much to all of our listeners. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.
See ya.
For more content like this, visit us at givingcompany.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Walking Through Samaria.